Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation on the role of early childhood education in supporting exceptional learners and in special education. I am Dr. Jessi Upshaw. I am a professor here at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and I am happy to be here with you today. I am going to turn off my camera today since I am presenting with the mask on. I feel it might just get a little distracting. So please sit back, enjoy your time. We're going to get a little interactive and share some resources, and let's go ahead and get started. Today, I want to go over more of a general overview of the role of early childhood education and early childhood educators in supporting exceptional learners in special education. So this is a presentation that will give you a broader view. So if you're looking for a little bit more in depth, don't worry, there will be an opportunity to look at resources as we go through, and I'm going to share a link with you that you can access those so you don't have to write everything down that I say. So why are we here? We really want to find out what is that role of early childhood education in supporting exceptional learners in special education. So before I go any further, what do we mean by exceptional learners? Well, exceptional learners is a term that is often used here in the United States to refer to students with disabilities, as well as those who are gifted and talented. So this is something that you'll commonly see in school districts or in literature referring to individuals with disabilities and individuals who are identified as gifted and talented. And when we say special education, that is the formal educational programming that is required by law in the United States under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it is designed specifically at no cost to parents. It covers children who have an identified need and an identified educational need and a disability from ages birth to age 21. So you already see here where early childhood education comes in here when we're looking at ages birth to about ages 5 to 8. It does include related services, so it's not just for the education side of in academic instruction, but it also includes speech language pathology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive physical education, mobility specialists, as if that service is required to support education. It is included in special education. So special education isn't a thing or a place specifically. It is a programming approach to educating individuals who are identified as exceptional learners. So that being said, let's go back to our question. What is the role of early childhood education and early childhood educators in supporting exceptional learners in special education? Well, we're going to break it down into 4 components today: identification, referral, instruction, and support. A little bit more on that in just a minute. Now, if you read the conference notes today, you saw that I asked to bring some paper and possibly some staples or fasteners and something to write with. This is completely optional. If you want to go ahead and participate, and if you are more of a hands-on writer, go ahead and get out your paper, fold it in half like you're making a book, staple it together so that you've got yourself a little place to write. We're going to pause throughout the presentation to write down some of your reflections and information that you want to remember about what we say about each of those 4 sections. However, if you are not a learner who learns best taking notes, or if you like more of electronic sources, or you want to just sit back and relax and listen today, I actually do have all of these resources on a website for you. It's a Google site, and I'm going to pause here for just a second so that you can write this down. It should be on your screen. It's kind of a long URL, but I'll give you just a minute to write that down, and I will show it again as we go through. So that being said, let's go ahead and move forward. If you did make that little book with your paper, you may want to write down these pieces: identification, referral, instruction, and support, because that is what we are going to go through today, and how early childhood educators can really support exceptional learners and how you can bring high quality educational experiences to the children in your educational setting, whether that's a child care facility or an early childhood education center. I'll give you just a minute if you would like to write down those 4 areas: identification, referral, instruction, and support. All right, let's start at the beginning here. You notice including an acronym. So in education, we love our acronyms. This is no different in the area of special education. We definitely love our acronyms. So today I want to use a visual acronym for you here of OR, as if you're rowing a boat, OAR. So when we're looking at identification, early childhood educators have the power of grabbing your oar, your power of observation, your power of assessment, and your power to record and document what you see. Developmentally appropriate practice supports the use of formal and informal assessment to support learning. It includes ongoing and strategic, professional, purposeful assessment that we use to focus on children's progress towards their developmental and educational goals. Those goals should take into account the student needs or the child's needs and the family's input, as well as any background and experiences the child may come to you with. Your observation, your assessment, and your recording should be focusing on being responsive to assessing in a variety of ways, as sometimes capturing what a student can do in one way is not the same way you're going to be able to capture and assess for another student. We need to account for differences in learner competencies and learning styles. The assessments that you complete should be developmentally appropriate. So obviously we're not going to complete an assessment for a child who is an infant that is intended for a preschooler. Your options for observations, assessment, and documentation also are not used to diagnose or label a child, but rather to identify if perhaps a referral to specialized education might be warranted. So this is evidence-based practice for us to use regularly in our educational settings, are observing what children are doing, assessing where they are at and the progress that they make, and then recording and documenting that so that can be shared with families and also become a part of their ongoing learning record. But in addition to that, it allows us to see skills throughout their developmental periods, and early childhood educators play that essential role in identifying the progress, the change or lack of change, and recognizing when there are skills that are at risk of losing the opportunity for progress, or skills that are significantly out of developmental level. And when that happens, that is a time that we are considering the next step. So what would you be looking for that might be significantly out of developmental level? Well, look for those flags, capturing the flags. There are such a wide range of what is developmentally appropriate for children, but there are some things that we can take into account that would really be out of range and warrant an immediate consideration for concern and discussion and referral. So when we look at the ages of birth to 12 months, your big red flags that you're looking for are deficits in the areas of basic movement, hearing, and sight. And they are usually caught by physicians, but as early childhood educators, this is still an important key role that you play for looking at areas that are significantly different in those areas of basic movement, hearing, and sight. For 12 months to 3 years, the areas that you might see big flags of concern would be walking, talking, interactions with peers, and use of hands. when you are working with children ages 3 to 5 years, the areas that you would be watching for that are of concern would be challenges in communication, movement, socialization, and learning new information. So when you're identifying these options, you can consider if there's something that is out of norm and not making progress. If you see things that are progressing, or things that are maybe behind some of the other children that you work with, there is so much range, but it might be worth noting that it's a skill to watch. And again, going back to that, observe, assess, and record, write it down and watch and see if it changes. Now, before I move forward, we are talking about potential referral for areas of growth and potential concern for identifying disability. However, I would be remiss if I did not mention part of exceptional learners are also giftedness. Now, while giftedness is often not a focus in early childhood education and early childhood learning, it is still something that you can see early signs. Some of those include unusual alertness in infancy, less need for sleep in infancy, long attention span, high activity levels, smiling or recognizing caretakers quite early, extraordinary memory, enjoyment and speed of learning, early and extensive language development, a pervasive curiosity, an excellent sense of humor real early on, early adoption of abstract reasoning and problem skills, as well as a vivid imagination, sensitivity, and compassion. Now, remember, there is a difference between a child who might be, you might use the term bright child, or a child who is an avid learner and quick problem solver, and a gifted child. And we are, again, using our powers of OR to observe and record and determine if further evaluation is needed, not to identify or label. So if you're seeing any of these differences, it's a time to consider the next step, which we will get to after a quick pause. If you are using your paper, go ahead and list 3 or more things that stuck out to you when we were talking about grabbing your OR, whether it's observation, assessment, or recording, whether it's those red flags that you might be looking for. Keep in mind, all of the resources that I'm sharing are available on the Google site listed here, so you do not need to write everything down, but I encourage you to take a minute to write down 3 things that really stuck out to you for the students that you work with, whether that's your own children, whether it's a child care center, whether that is a preschool center. What sticks out for you for how you play a role in identifying students with learning differences? I'll give you just a minute. Okay, moving on. So if you do identify a learning difference, the next step would be to do something to support the family. So the next step in the role that you play as an early childhood educator is referral. And that involves being an advocate and supporting families and children through the process of determining if there is a need for additional support beyond what they're already getting in your educational environment. So if the student population you work with is birth to age 3, typically a referral can come from the parent, a physician, or an educator. You would be contacting a state intervention center, and I have all of those listed on our resource page that I've been sharing through this presentation. If you don't have access to the State Intervention Center to send forward, perhaps your educational site does have an evaluation center right there, and you can use that. An additional option is to refer parents to their local school, their neighborhood school, or their local school district, because all school districts do have resources to connect families birth to age 3 to do full evaluations to determine if a family an individualized family service plan is appropriate to support that child. If you work with a population in early childhood education, starting at age 3, this does go all the way up to 21, but obviously early childhood, we wouldn't go quite that far. There is a program required by federal law that falls under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's commonly referred to as Child Find, and it's in all schools, and all educators are and community organizations are obligated to find and any individuals who are at risk who might need evaluation, and those evaluations are typically done through those local schools. This often happens as a parent or an educator referral from ages 3 up. So that said, let's talk a little bit more about the advocacy portion of supporting families when you are in the referral process. Obviously, if you have identified a concern or an area that you feel might need further evaluation, finding the way in which to share that information is extremely important. Having the right information to refer families is also important. That involves communicating with your if you have a system in place at your educational setting. If you don't, I encourage you to create a system to be sure you have accurate information to share with families when you're referring them. And then you're also going to continue supporting families through instruction, because just because they're going through an evaluation doesn't mean that child is not with you and that you're not organizing learning opportunities. So you continue to support and encourage families that their child will be included in those learning experiences, and find support both for yourself as a professional. We're going to talk more about how to do this a little bit later on. But find support for yourself as a professional so you're engaging with strategies that will be successful, but also continue to provide that support for families. It's really important to note that especially in this early childhood stage, you can find that a newly evaluated child, their family may be going through a grieving process. And it's not to say that your child might have a learning difference, whether that's gifted and talented or a disability, is necessarily a negative experience or reflection, but it is a grief process in the acceptance of what expectations were, and then what they might need to be for this stage in the family's life. And so supporting families through that and understanding that there might be sadness, there might be anger, there might be confusion, there might be a few steps that are involved prior to getting to that acceptance stage. Now, I've provided several resources related to being a teacher advocate and supporting families through the process of referral on that site that I have mentioned. So you don't have to worry about writing that down. You will have all of those resources at your fingertips. But I do encourage you to now take a moment to reflect on the student group that you work with, that you're with most often, whether that's the birth to age 3 group or the age 3 to 5, 3 to 7 early childhood group. And reflect on some of the things that you'd like to take with you from what we just talked about, of how you have a role in referring students with learning differences and how you might choose to be an advocate and find support for families. Anything that stuck with you, anything that you're already doing, or anything that you'd like to begin doing now that we've kind of gone over that role that you play. I'm going to give you just a moment. A reminder that website is on the bottom of this screen so that you can visit for those additional resources. Okay, as promised, let's go on to the next step, the next role that we play as early childhood educators in supporting our students, and that is instruction. As I said, it doesn't stop just because you notice through your using your oars that there's something that you want to monitor and really determine, and it doesn't stop if you make a referral for additional evaluation to determine if additional support is necessary. Instruction continues to happen, and it really is a time game when we're talking about early childhood intervention. The opportunity to make a big impact is so strong at this stage in development. Early intervention counts. This is for students that are learning any skill, but especially so when we have a student with a learning challenge, if they're identified as a disability, if they have a gifted and talented opportunity for growth and extending well beyond what you're already doing in your educational environment. Early intervention and special education can really improve those trajectories for children with disabilities, and it can improve their overall outcomes later in life and later in childhood, even with health, language, their cognitive skills, their social skills, that emotional development. It really builds a foundation early on when we can hit those opportunities early. There's so much research that suggests the earliest experiences, and you all know this, your early childhood educators, that their earliest experiences play such a strong role in brain development. And when we provide these high quality early intervention programs, we are more likely to reduce the incidence of future problems. Some of these situations with early intervention, you can almost see indistinguishable functioning later in childhood and later in school years if they have the opportunity to build the skills early. So that means you are a key factor in success and outcome. It really can change their path, and like I said, some children can actually catch up to the same developmental levels as other children, even if they had delays early on. So I have included some resources for early intervention and the importance of it, many resources for accessing activities. Like I said, we're doing just kind of an overview today. So if you want to get more in depth, you'll want to visit that site and then maybe do a little research on your own too that meets the activities that you like to do. But one thing I do want to focus on here is differentiation. I'm sure you've heard this word, and you know, it can be used in many ways, but differentiation when it comes to early childhood education allows for you to take what you're already doing and provide opportunities for extending things that students have already, some of the kids might be already doing. You can take an activity with colors and make it more involving critical thinking and a little bit more depth for the students that have mastered, and then take it down to a more basic building blocks level for the students that might need a little bit of work on it. It allows for opportunities for you to work with groups of students and also opportunities to individually focus on things that are happening. It does involve planning, but it also takes into account all the needs. What it is not, what differentiation is not, is making things easier, having specific groups that are grouped by ability rather than allowing individuals with different abilities to work on activities together. It is not meaning everyone is doing group work. It does not mean that everything is individualized instruction. Differentiation is really that opportunity for you to create that learning experience now that you know, because you've observed, assessed, and recorded the needs of your students. And you may have some students that you've had to refer for additional evaluation. It means that you're taking their needs into consideration and making one activity work for multiple learning styles. And again, with this overview, I'm not going into the specific activities you might do, but I have provided many of those for you on that website. So you can dig a little deeper and differentiate what you need today rather than me telling you just a few examples. You'll be able to find the ones that really work for you. So we're going to pause again. Instruction is really one of the most important pieces that you play as an early childhood educator because that early intervention counts. So do me a favor here, think about 3 or more ways that you might be reflecting on how you can take that opportunity for making an impact with early intervention and design activities for students with different learning needs and why that might be important. I'm going to go ahead and pause while you think on that for just a moment. And again, that Google site is there for you if you'd like to dig a little deeper into some differentiation and early intervention strategies. All right, so we've talked about identification, we've talked about referral when it's necessary, when we're identifying different learning needs, and we've talked about the role that we play in continuing to design activities and early intervention. Now let's talk about support. So support is something that happens all the way through, but I want to take our conversation on support and focus on ability rather than the term disability. So when we talk about individuals with exceptional learning needs, we're talking about gifted and talented, we're talking about disability, focusing on what a student can do rather than keeping the focus on the disability itself is so essential. And this is almost more of a mindset shift than it is a system of focusing on our kiddos in their educational environment. And what I mean by that is we do need evaluations and we do need ways to classify how we're going to provide help and support. So there are labels, there are disabilities. It's required by law that we identify a disability before an individual can qualify for those supports in special education. So that piece is there for a reason. But when we're actually with the child, the focus is on the ability. The focus is the mindset on saying strengths and areas of growth instead of strengths and weaknesses. It might be that we're focusing on the way in which we use our language, so inclusive language and avoiding terms that focus on the disability rather than the person. We often call it person first language. So instead of saying a disabled person, we say a person with a disability or a child with a disability or a student with an exceptionality. We want to avoid terms that aren't used anymore, such as handicapped or crippled. Almost makes me cringe to say. If you see an individual who is using a wheelchair, you can say an individual in a wheelchair or a wheelchair user rather than someone who is confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. We don't use those terms anymore. We also want to avoid using negative terms that kind of disempower children. I mentioned that term weakness, that can be disempowering when we can instead use areas of growth or avoid using things like someone who suffers from ADHD or is challenged by or the victim of. We want to avoid those types of things. Another really important thing to note when you're focusing on ability, and especially in these early childhood settings, not all ability differences are visible. So while you might have some abilities, especially the ones that show up earlier in the younger years, the birth to 12 months, that do tend to be more visible, so many differing abilities are not visible. And so you want to respect the child's needs and respect what you're observing and respect what they might be requesting, because you may or may not know whether they actually are an individual with a learning difference. And also, we want to talk about inclusion in early childhood education. And that means just because we have ability differences identified, that doesn't mean that the child is going to have a change in enrollment or a change in placement. It means that we are now in a classroom environment that uses that differentiation and includes the individual in all the learning experiences. Now, they may have different goals out of those learning experiences than some of the other learners in the activity, but that inclusion is still there. And it also provides that opportunity to include all children in these early childhood education settings in some inclusive social emotional learning opportunities, talking about how we're all different. There are so many books out there that you can check out, talking about including all learning styles. Maybe my shoes are purple and your shoes are red, but we all have shoes. There's different ways to make it a little bit more concrete for early childhood learners. But we do want to actually incorporate some curriculum that's explicitly focused on including different learning styles and different abilities in the classroom. And it does take a village. I know that's a cliche, but I will never stop using that one. When you're focusing on support, you need to continue to support yourself and the learners as well as their families. That is a huge role you play as an early childhood educator in supporting exceptional learners and the process of special education support for children. I really encourage you to check out not only the resources I've booked for you in this presentation, but those that you are able to find on your own. Continue to seek out professional development opportunities so that you can support that goal of supporting learners with exceptionalities. There's so much out there. There's so much more to learn. And I've only gone over the very basics today to give you kind of that overview. And also approach supporting learning differences in a collaborative fashion, because those resources are there for the families that you work with. They may have resources you don't have. You may have resources they don't have. Your colleagues, whether you work in a setting with multiple colleagues or if you're on your own, reaching out to other networks of early childhood educators to make sure that you're supporting together and constantly learning and continuing to build your library of resources to really fulfill that role that you play. So I'm going to pause one more time for you to consider 3 or more ways that you're kind of reflecting now of how you are finding support for yourself as an early childhood educator, or supporting your students with learning differences, and how you will focus on ability and supporting families with those differing abilities. I'll give you just a minute. Okay. So today we've really focused in on your role, the 4 things that you do as an early childhood educator to support exceptional learners in special education. So consider how you grab your oar. How are you recording and watching for those areas that might need to be monitored closely and potentially make referrals when you need them. Those early identifications really are strongly associated with positive outcomes. Trust what you know about individual children and share it with the evaluation team if you have referred. Your area of expertise is really unique and you know those children so well. Do keep in mind that a disability diagnosis does not change the child. and try not to let it affect your mindset in changing who they are, but rather changing your mindset and how you provide that instruction, that early intervention. Using differentiation. Consistency is so important. Encourage families to keep the child involved in neighborhood, community-based, and your early childhood education-based activities as much as possible. Having those opportunities with peers and continuing that path of inclusion is so important. Work with, if a child is identified through referral and evaluation, work with the other service professionals to implement those goals. Everybody working on the same page can be so essential in success and those outcomes for the individuals. Do expect to learn a lot of new information. As I said, there's tons of acronyms, there's lots of agencies and different teaching strategies. So keeping your mind open and again, supporting yourself in continuing to develop yourself as an early childhood educator who specializes in supporting exceptional learners and fulfilling that role. You really do provide an invaluable service to parents. You're their listener, you're their support, you're their advocate as you support their young learners. So thank you so much. I hope you have taken in the essential role that you play in special education and as an educator of individuals with exceptionalities in the early childhood education area. There's a brief view of some of the references that I used today, but as I said, those resources are all shared for you today on the site that I've put on the screen several times. You can also email me with any questions you might have. There's also a link to my email on that resource page if you did not have a chance to write it down. Thank you so much for having me today at the Early Childhood Education Conference for 2021 here at UAGC, and I thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone.